Las Vegas Raiders training camp is open, and what's coming out of that facility right now is not what the skeptics were hoping to report. I want to be upfront about that, because I know exactly how early Tory optimism operates in football media during the summer months before reality shows up around week 4 of the regular season. I've been trained to apply that skepticism, and I apply it consistently. But what's emerging from this facility in these first days has a specific texture and a specific consistency that I think deserves genuine engagement rather than reflexive dismissal. So let me walk you through everything. The quarterback situation, the secondary transformation, the receiver competition, the developmental investments across the roster, and let me do it with the precision all of it actually deserves. Fernando Mendoza is where everything starts, because the honest truth is that every other piece of this roster exists in relationship to what happens at that position. The physical reports coming out of camp address something directly that I always thought was undercooked in the pre-draft skepticism surrounding him. 6'5", over 230 pounds, long arms, a frame that allows a quarterback to absorb incidental contact and keep his eyes moving through it's a hand on him. The arm strength that some evaluators were quietly flagging as a potential professional limitation is reportedly landing above what those concerned leave defensive backs questioning the laws of physics. But a passer delivering the ball into every window Clint Kubiak's offense with the authority and velocity that make a receiver's catch cleaner and a defensive back's break on the ball more difficult. That is functional arm strength at the professional level. The system requires it. The early evidence says it's there. The comparison circulating out of camp pairs Sam Darnold's movement patterns and physical build with the frame and size profile of Jared Goff. I think that framework is useful as a starting point for visualizing what Mendoza is as a physical quarterback, but I want to be careful about where the Darnold parallel goes, because that career is simultaneously one of the most instructive and one of the most misread stories in recent NFL quarterback development. The instinct when you hear the Darnold comparison is to immediately think about the years that nearly buried him, the interceptions, the dysfunction, the accumulation of organizational failures that almost ended a talented player's career before he had genuinely been given the conditions to show what he was. But the more important part of that story, the part that actually applies to what is being built in Las Vegas right now, is what Darnold became when those conditions finally changed, when he landed in the right system with the right protection and the right coaching infrastructure around him. The player that emerged was not a surprise to anyone who had watched him closely enough to separate his ability from the dysfunction surrounding it. He was always that player. Mendoza is not entering dysfunction. He is entering from day one the conditions Darnold needed from day one and never received. That distinction changes everything about how the next several years should be projected. But the specific thing about Mendoza that I find more revealing than any physical measurement is a decision he made before training camp even opened. He was invited to attend the White House ceremony for the Indiana National Championship team. He is the first overall pick in the entire NFL draft. He is 22 years old. The opportunity to be photographed at the White House with his college teammates would have been completely understandable, and nobody inside or outside that organization would have held it against him for a single second. He declined. He stayed at the facility. He took extra repetitions. He chose to learn the offense rather than celebrate what the offense he was leaving had produced. That kind of decision doesn't come from a coaching staff memo. Nobody issues a directive telling a first overall pick to skip a White House trip. That is internal. It comes from a player who has a specific, honest understanding of where he stands in his development and what the current moment requires of him that no external recognition can override. I don't know how to quantify what that reveals about who Fernando Mendoza is. I just know it tells me something that matters. The pre-practice preparation detail adds another layer that I want to make sure lands properly. Both Mendoza and center Tyler Linderbaum are new to this organization, learning this offense simultaneously. That quarterback-center relationship, the specific physical and communicative partnership that determines how reliably the snap exchange and pre-snap cadence work when the game is real and the pressure is genuine, takes repetitions to build into something you can actually trust. Mendoza is not waiting for the official practice schedule to accumulate those repetitions. He is out there before practice, voluntarily, working through snaps both under center and from the gun, building the timing and communication with Linderbaum that the offense needs to function at its best. That work never shows up in a box score. It never will. But it directly determines how the offense operates in the moments that matter most, and Mendoza is investing in it before anyone is asking him to. Now let me address the quarterback competition honestly, because I think the emotional version of this discussion skips past a genuine organizational argument that deserves real engagement. Kirk Cousins is trending toward the Week 1 starting job based on what the early days of camp are producing. That is the honest read. And before the reflexive reaction takes over. I want to make the actual case for why that decision is not as simple as it might look from the outside. The argument for managing Mendoza's introduction carefully has real historical weight behind it. 2 decades ago, first-round quarterbacks routinely sat for a full season or two before the organization put them under center with real consequences attached. That patience was not cowardice. It was an understanding that the habits and decision-making patterns a quarterback develops in his first live professional experiences become the foundation everything that follows is built on, and a foundation constructed under bad conditions, without protection, without genuine system mastery, tends to crack in ways that take years to repair if they can be repaired at all. Sam Darnold is the cautionary illustration I keep returning to because it is the most complete version of that story available right now. The Jets took a genuinely talented quarterback and placed him in a situation with almost nothing functional around him. The pass protection was inadequate. The receiving talent was thin. The coaching infrastructure didn't provide the developmental support that a young quarterback's growth requires. And what happened was not simply that Darnold failed to develop. What happened is that he developed compensatory habits, risk-averse decision-making patterns, a relationship with pocket pressure that was shaped by the specific dysfunction he was operating inside, rather than by offensive mastery that should have been shaping it. His career nearly ended before he turned 26. When he finally landed in the right conditions, the player that emerged was not a new version of Sam Darnold. It was the original evaluation finally operating in the right environment. The lesson is not that he was always going to be fine, regardless of circumstances. The lesson is that development requires protection, and organizations that refuse to provide it in the name of competitive urgency pay for it in damage to a player's ceiling that often cannot be fully recovered. I take that argument seriously, but here is where I actually land, and I want to be direct about it. If Mendoza goes through the full training camp competitive process and demonstrates to this coaching staff that he has genuinely internalized the system well enough to operate within it at the professional level from week 1, then the decision should be to start him. And when you make that call, you have to back it with real organizational commitment, which means a meaningful sample of actual games before any evaluative recalibration happens. 10 games minimum, not 5, not 3. The damage done to young quarterbacks inside panic windows when the coaching staff is already internally questioning the decision before the player has had enough time to make meaningful mistakes and learn from them is real and consistently underestimated. What separates quarterbacks who reach their developmental ceiling from those who fall short of it is rarely physical ability. It is whether the organization had the patience to back their commitment with actual behavior over time, rather than just with public statements. Let me move to the secondary, because this is one of the most important and least discussed transformation stories happening across this entire roster. Jermaine McCollum is practicing. The knee is responding to the full workload of camp. The athleticism that had scouts projecting him as the first cornerback off the board in the entire draft class before the injury concern surfaced is reportedly showing up in full on the practice field right now. Let me make sure the weight of that actually lands. The Raiders acquired a player who carried first-round projection before medical concerns drove him to the 4th round, and he is practicing without restriction in the early days of camp. If his knee continues to hold, and his development proceeds the way the early evidence suggests it can, the Raiders are looking at first-round caliber performance at a 4th-round investment. That kind of value creation is the specific mechanism through which smart franchises build competitive advantages that translate directly into wins in October and November. Stokes is emerging as another genuine piece in this secondary picture, bringing the combination of speed, physicality, and positional versatility that allows him to function as a box safety against the run while carrying the athleticism to operate in space when coverage situations demand it. That hybrid safety profile has been a structural gap in this defense for years, and Stokes profiles as a direct answer to it. When you step back and look at the full picture of what this secondary represents right now compared to where it was in recent seasons, the transformation is not incremental. It is categorical. The 3rd and 4th corners on this current roster are better football players than what this franchise was putting on the field as starters not long ago. That is not manufactured optimism. That is what the competitive evidence from camp is actually saying. That secondary improvement carries specific implications for Maxx Crosby that deserve to be stated directly. Crosby has been one of the most disruptive edge rushers in this league across his professional career, and he has done it for years while operating behind a secondary that consistently gave opposing quarterbacks a functional reason to escape the pocket. When a quarterback trusts his receivers to win behind a pass rush, the urgency to process quickly evaporates. He pulls the ball down, rolls out, extends the play, finds an escape route. The pass rusher's production suffers. The actual dominance being generated gets masked by the environment's limitations rather than reflected by it. Give Crosby a secondary that forces quarterbacks to hold the football. That makes scrambling genuinely costly because the downfield consequences are real and consistent, and every single rep he takes becomes more productive. The best secondaries in football don't just cover receivers. They make pass rushers look like the players their tape always said they were. The Raiders are building that relationship for Crosby for what may be the first real time in his professional career, and I think we are significantly underestimating what it is going to produce over the course of a full season. The wide receiver competition below the settled depth chart is one of the genuinely open battles in this camp, and more interesting than the surrounding conversation consistently acknowledges. Benson is separating himself with the kind of quick release precision off the line and route execution specificity that builds a young quarterback's trust fast. Thornton has to compete for his position on the same terms as everyone else, regardless of what his draft status says, and the current camp reads suggest he is being evaluated under exactly those terms. Williams is the name I keep coming back to, and a significant part of that is the pre-existing relationship he carries into the building from his time alongside Mendoza at Indiana. Two players who have already built the timing and trust that most quarterback-receiver partnerships spend an entire professional season trying to construct from scratch. That built-in familiarity has genuine competitive value in the context of developing a young franchise quarterback, and Williams is showing enough in camp that losing him to a practice squad claim from another organization would represent a real cost. That is the kind of player you protect, not release as a depth afterthought. Mike Washington anchoring the backfield as the primary back covers functional needs without organizational waste at a position where efficiency matters. His athletic profile at the Combine placed him among the most physically gifted backs to test at his position in recent memory, and the early camp work is reportedly reflecting that physical reality at full professional speed. Himby reads as the most likely undrafted player to secure a roster spot behind him, not because of one overwhelming attribute, but because of functional competence across every dimension a backup back is asked to provide. Pass protection, receiving out of the backfield, running between the tackles with enough efficiency to keep an offense competitive in manageable situations, special teams contribution. That complete profile at a position the team can fill without significant capital investment is exactly what smart depth construction looks like in practice. Nicholas Henning rounds out the developmental picture on the offensive line, and I want to address him with appropriate clarity about what this investment actually represents. 6'6", 320 pounds, a player who came to the sport relatively late and is still in the early stages of building the specific technical repertoire that offensive tackle demands at the professional level. He is not competing for a starting spot in year one, and nobody inside the organization is suggesting otherwise. What he is a physical foundation worth investing developmental time in, a player whose size and movement quality and raw athletic tools justify a practice squad investment, while the coaching staff works to translate those materials into the technique-driven competence the position requires. The Raiders have demonstrated throughout this rebuild that they are willing to make long-horizon investments at premium positions when the physical foundation justifies it. Henning is that category of investment. Here is the larger picture that all of these individual stories form when you step back far enough to see them together, because I think the individual pieces are genuinely interesting, but the structure they create is what actually matters for understanding where this franchise is headed. This roster is not cosmetically different from what this organization was fielding during the difficult recent seasons. It is structurally different in the ways that produce outcomes that last, rather than generating surface-level optimism for a year or two before the reset button gets pressed again. The secondary moved from chronic liability to genuine competitive strength through smart evaluation and patient development, rather than expensive free agent investment. The pass rush is anchored by one of the best edge players in the sport, who is finally operating with secondary support that amplifies everything he does. The offensive system is sophisticated and quarterback-friendly and being run by coaches who understand the difference between developing a young player correctly and simply maximizing short-term performance at the expense of long-term trajectory. And at the center of all of it is a first overall pick who skipped a White House trip to take extra snaps, who shows up before practice to build chemistry with his center before the schedule requires it, and who is showing this coaching staff in the earliest days of camp exactly what kind of competitive seriousness drives everything he does. That is the foundation. And foundations like that are exactly what durable things get built on.